You are standing on a wooden plank that hasn't been completely dry in 3 years, listening to the slow, agonizing groan of white oak, straining against an unforgiving Atlantic swell. It is 3 o'clock in the morning, a time when the world of land and law feels like a fever dream you had a lifetime ago. The air around you is thick, almost chewable, heavy with the suffocating stench of rotting timber, stagnant bilge water, and the sharp, chemical tang of unwashed human desperation. There is no moon tonight. The darkness is so absolute that you cannot see your own hand hovering inches from your face, but you can feel the sea. You feel it in the violent, unpredictable lurching beneath your boots, a motion that forces your calf muscles to constantly tighten and adjust, aching with a fatigue that settles deep into your marrow. To your left, a sudden wet splash breaks the rhythm of the waves. A rat, bloated and desperate, dropping from the rigging into the black void below. You realize, with a cold tightening in your chest, that this floating cage is not a vehicle of grand adventure. It is a wooden coffin that has somehow forgotten to sink. Most people look back at this golden age of piracy through a glass darkly, blinded by the cinematic glare of flapping black flags, flashing cutlasses, and men who laughed in the face of the gallows. We have been fed a diet of romantic myths, taught to believe that the men who sailed under Henry Every or Bartholomew Roberts were free princes of the ocean, answering to no one but the wind. But the truth is far heavier, far darker, and infinitely more suffocating. If you were stepped back across the centuries and dropped onto the deck of a 1700 pirate vessel, your struggle would not begin with a theatrical duel against a royal galleon. Your battle would begin with the air you breathe, the water you drink, and the terrifying realization that your survival is measured not in years or months, but in the next 24 hours. The reality of the pirate's life was an exercise in extreme psychological and physical endurance, an existence where the greatest enemies were not British man-of-war ships, but the microscopic predators in your water cask, the creeping rot in your gums, and the volatile, paranoid minds of the 50 desperate men trapped in the dark alongside you. Listen closely to the ship around you. It is never truly silent. Below the deck, the sound of the hull plowing through the water is a low, rhythmic thrumming that vibrates through the soles of your feet, a reminder that only a few inches of caulked timber separate you from an abyss miles deep. Beneath that thrumming lies the chorus of the crew. 50, sometimes 80 men are packed into a low-ceilinged berth that is barely 4 feet high. They sleep in shifts, slung in canvas hammocks that sway in eerie unison with the ship's roll, their bodies pressed so close together that you can feel the radiant, feverish heat of the man beside you. The air in the lower deck is a warm, humid soup of exhaled breath, tobacco smoke, the sour reek of unwashed wool, and the unmistakable, sweet scent of gangrene drifting from a makeshift berth near the bow. To survive here, you must learn to disconnect your mind from your senses. You must learn to ignore the persistent, frantic scratching of thousands of black rats navigating the space between the inner and outer hulls, treating the ship like a living, breathing labyrinth of wood and flesh. The soaring terror of this existence is rooted in a profound paradox. These men cast off the brutal tyranny of the merchant navy and the Royal Navy only to willingly subject themselves to an environment that was, in many ways, far more volatile. In the conventional navy, there was an order, a cruel predictability. There were rations, there were doctors, and there was the weight of an empire backing your voyage. Here on the account, you are entirely on your own. Every resource is a finite luxury. The water in the hold, pumped into oak casks months ago in some tropical mangrove swamp, has already turned green with algae and thick with the larvae of mosquitoes. To drink it, you must hold a piece of cloth over your mouth to strain out the visible, wriggling organisms, swallowing a liquid that tastes of rot and sulfur. The food is no better. The hardtack biscuits are so infested with weevils that experienced sailors only eat them in the dark, preferring not to see the small white worms they are chewing. This is the daily currency of the pirate life, not chests of Spanish doubloons, but a constant, grinding negotiation with starvation and disease. Why, then, did men choose this? To understand the sheer weight of what you would face in your first 24 hours, you must understand the desperation that drove men to the deck of a ship like Henry Every's Fancy. These were not romantic rebels. They were refugees from a maritime system that treated human beings as disposable fuel. In the merchant service, a captain was a dictator with the legal authority to starve, beat, or work a man to death for the slightest infraction. Men were routinely flogged until their backs resembled raw meat, only to be rubbed with salt brine to prevent infection. When their voyages ended, merchant barons often cheated sailors out of their wages, leaving them destitute in port towns. Piracy was not a career choice made out of a love for lawlessness. It was an act of violent, collective mutiny against a world that had offered them nothing but pain and poverty. When a crew took over a vessel, they were executing a radical, dangerous experiment in survival, turning the ship into a floating republic where every man had a vote, but every man also carried the terrifying burden of total self-reliance. But that collective experiment came with a psychological toll that few modern minds can fully comprehend. The moment you step onto that deck, you are a dead man walking in the eyes of the law. The High Court of Admiralty does not offer trials of nuance or mercy for those who sail under the pirate total. If captured, there is only one destination, Hope Point at Wapping, where you will be hanged. At the low water mark, your body left to be washed over by 3 tides before being encased in an iron cage, gibbeted as a rotting warning to other sailors. This knowledge hangs over the ship like a permanent, invisible fog. It sharpens every conversation, tenses every muscle, and turns every horizon into a source of acute anxiety. Every sail spotted on the distance could be your executioner. This creates a highly volatile psychological atmosphere on board. These men are hyper-aware that they have crossed a line from which there is no return, making them fiercely protective of their newfound autonomy, yet deeply paranoid of betrayal from within. Imagine the claustrophobia of this space. A 1700s pirate vessel is essentially a floating fortress crowded with too many men and too few supplies. There are no private quarters, save for the small cabin allotted to the captain and quartermaster, and even their spaces are subject to the scrutiny of the crew. You live your life entirely in the public eye. Your every groan, every prayer, and every bowel movement witnessed by dozens of peers. The concept of personal space does not exist. Your world has shrunk to a deck roughly 100 feet long and 30 feet wide. Within this confined theater, human friction is inevitable. A misplaced word, an accidental bump in the dark, or an perceived unfairness in the distribution of chores can instantly ignite a wave of violence. To prevent the ship from tearing itself apart from the inside, the crew relies on a strict, unwritten code, the Articles. But the enforcement of these rules is a delicate dance on a knife's edge, balancing absolute democracy with the constant threat of lethal force. As the pre-dawn mist begins to roll across the deck, clinging to your damp clothes like a cold shroud, the true magnitude of your situation settles in. You are miles from any civilized shore, sailing on a vessel that is legally hunted by every global power, surrounded by men who have nothing left to lose. Your body is already crying out for fresh water. Your skin is irritated by salt crust and biting lice, and the sky above is turning a bruised, ominous gray that suggests a storm is brewing on the horizon. This is the baseline. This is the starting point of your 24 hours. You have survived the night, but the day is about to demand a price that your body and mind may not be prepared to pay. You are sitting on a damp sea chest as the first, pale veins of a gray dawn bleed across the eastern horizon, revealing the true faces of the men you are trapped with. In the growing light, they do not look like fierce conquerors. They look like ghosts who have been dragged through the gears of an industrial machine and cast out to sea. To understand why you wouldn't survive 24 hours among them, you must understand the invisible scars they carry. These men were forged in the brutal nurseries of the Thames docklands, the squalid taverns of Bristol, and the predatory press gang cells of Portsmouth. Their childhoods were not defined by play, but by an early, violent introduction to the realities of survival in a society that viewed the poor as mere fuel for the furnace of global trade. By the time a man reached his 20s, on a vessel like Henry Every's Fancy, his body was already a map of historical traumas, broken bones that had knit crookedly in the dark, and a mind thoroughly conditioned to expect nothing from the world but cruelty. Look at the hands of the man sitting across from you, methodically picked at a frayed piece of hemp rope. His fingers are permanently curled, blackened beneath the nails by Stockholm tar that has worked its way so deep into the skin it will never wash out. He is likely no older than 25, yet his face is lined with the deep, permanent furrows of a man of 50. He represents the standard origin of a pirate crew, a survivor of the merchant marine or the Royal Navy who reached a breaking point. In those legitimate services, men were subjected to a form of discipline that was deliberately designed to break the human spirit. Captains possessed absolute legal authority, backed by the crown, to inflict terrifying violence for the smallest perceived slights. A sailor could be sentenced to flogging round the fleet, tied to a frame on a longboat, and rowed from ship to ship, receiving dozens of lashes at each stop, until his back was literally stripped to the spine, while a drummer played a rhythmic beat to drown out his screams. This systemic sadism created a profound, collective psychological wound. The men who mutinied and turned pirate were not running toward crime. They were running away from an unbearable, institutionalized nightmare. When Henry Every led the famous mutiny aboard the Charles II in 1694, it wasn't sparked by a sudden desire for gold, but by months of withheld pay, rotten provisions, and the realization that the ship's owners intended to let the crew starve in a foreign port while the officers lived in luxury. That shared trauma is the glue that holds a pirate crew together, but it is also a highly volatile fuel. These men suffer from what a modern doctor would instantly recognize as severe, unaddressed post-traumatic stress. They are hyper-vigilant, easily triggered into explosive violence, and deeply suspicious of anyone who attempts to assert authority over them. In your first 24 hours, navigating this minefield of fragile, damaged egos is far more dangerous than any storm the Atlantic can throw at you. You can feel the residual tension of that origin story in the very architecture of the ship. In the Royal Navy, the quarterdeck was a sacred space, a raised platform at the stern where only officers could walk, a physical manifestation of class supremacy. If a common sailor stepped onto the quarterdeck without permission, he faced immediate, severe punishment. But on a pirate ship, that hierarchy has been violently inverted. You watch a dirty, barefoot sailor stroll onto the quarterdeck to spit into the sea, leaning casually against the rail next to the captain. Here, the quarterdeck has been democratized. The captain only owns his cabin during a chase or a battle. At all other times, it is open to any member of the crew who wishes to enter. This absolute rejection of traditional class structures is exhilarating, but it creates a strange, shifting social landscape where order is maintained not by law, but by a delicate, shifting consensus. The pirate ship was a radical experiment in working-class democracy, born from the ashes of naval tyranny. But democracy, among men who have known only the whip, is a fragile, terrifying thing. This total lack of a traditional safety net means that every man's formative wounds are constantly on display. Most of the crew spent their teenage years as maritime apprentices, which was often just a polite term for legal slavery. They were boys sent aloft into the rigging during midnight gales, their small fingers freezing to the canvas, beaten with canes by the boatswain's mates if they moved too slowly. Many saw their friends fall from the yards, dropping through the darkness into the black water below, the ship sailing on without a pause, because a common boy was not worth the effort of turning the vessel around. This absolute cheapness of human life in their formative years has left them with a profound existential numbness. They do not value their own lives because the world never valued them. When you look into the eyes of a pirate, you are looking at a man who has already accepted that he will die young, miserable, and violent. That realization makes them incredibly brave in battle, but it also makes them terrifyingly unpredictable companions in the quiet hours of the night. Furthermore, the physical toll of their past lives is an ever-present burden on the ship's daily operations. Scurvy, though not yet fully understood by science, has already done its silent work on many of these men during their years in the merchant service. The lack of vitamin C has weakened the connective tissues in their bodies. Old wounds, healed years ago, have a horrifying tendency to spontaneously open up again. Gums are spongy and black, and teeth loosen in their sockets with the slightest pressure. Chronic respiratory ailments, caused by years of sleeping in damp, unventilated holds, manifest as a constant, wet coughing that echoes through the decks at night. As you watch them move about the deck, securing lines and tending to the sails, you see a crew of walking wounded, held together by sheer willpower, cheap rum, and the intoxicating, dangerous dream of a single, massive prize that will allow them to buy their way out of this watery hell forever. As the sun finally clears the horizon, casting a harsh, unforgiving light across the sea, the illusion of romantic piracy evaporates completely. You see the patches on the sails, the rust bleeding from the iron fittings, and the deep, hollow exhaustion etched into the faces of your shipmates. They are men who have declared war on the entire world because the world declared war on them first. To survive 24 hours in their presence, you cannot afford to be an outsider, an observer, or a person of delicate sensibilities. You must share their anger, understand their trauma, and accept that, in this lawless wooden world, your life is worth exactly what you can contribute to the survival of the collective. You are standing at the base of the mainmast at 7 o'clock in the morning, looking up into a dizzying labyrinth of hemp rigging that sways violently against a rapidly darkening sky. The wind has shifted, taking on a sharp, biting edge that whistles through the shrouds like a warning. The morning calmness is gone. The ship's quartermaster, not the captain, steps into the center of the deck, his voice cutting through the roar of the surf like a cracked whip. On a vessel like the Fancy, this is the moment where theory ends and the brutal reality of survival begins. You are about to witness the ascent, not through a grand cinematic rise to glory, but through the exhausting, high-stakes choreography of maritime labor and the razor-thin margin between a successful maneuver and a catastrophic failure that could drown the entire crew before noon. To survive the next hour, you must climb. The quartermaster points a calloused finger directly at you, ordering you aloft to reef the main topsails as a squall line approaches. This is not a request. It is the ultimate test of your utility to the collective. You approach the ratlines, the rope ladders tarred into the shrouds, and begin to climb. Within 10 feet, the illusion of stability vanishes. Every motion of the ship's hull through the water is magnified exponentially the higher you go. By the time you reach the main yard, 60 feet above the deck, the world has turned into a terrifying, pendulum-like nightmare. The mast arcs violently through the air, throwing you outward over the raging, white-capped sea 1 second, then slamming you back toward the hard wooden deck the next. Your fingers, slick with salt spray and cold sweat, must grip the wet canvas of the sail, while your feet balance on a single foot rope that shakes with the movements of the men working alongside you. This is where the true strategy of pirate life reveals itself. It is a meritocracy of absolute necessity. If you freeze up out of fear, if your grip fails, or if you tie a knot improperly, you don't just risk your own life, you risk tearing the sail, snapping the yardarm, and crippling the ship's ability to maneuver or flee from a predator. There are no safety harnesses, no backup nets, and no second chances. The men beside you do not look at you with sympathy. They watch you with a cold, calculating intensity. They need to know if you are a liability. In the pirate code, the greatest sin is not cowardice, but incompetence. If a man cannot pull his weight during a maneuver, he is worse than useless. He is a threat to the survival of the Republic. Once back on the deck, your hands bleeding from raw canvas burns, and your knees trembling from adrenaline, you immediately see the political complexity of this environment. The squall passes, but it leaves a heavier tension in its wake. The crew gathers around the main hatch for a vote. A sail has been spotted on the horizon. A large, heavy-set merchantman, flying Portuguese colors. In a Royal Navy vessel, the captain would simply issue an order to engage, and the crew would obey under pain of death. Here, the captain stands at the edge of the crowd, waiting for the quartermaster to conduct a democratic assembly. Every man, from the veteran gunner to the newly captured cook, has an equal vote in determining whether the ship will chase, what tactics will be used, and how the potential spoils will be divided. A pirate captain is a leader by consent, not by divine right. He is given absolute power during a chase or a battle. But the moment the guns fall silent, he is just another voice in the crowd. This democratic structure is a brilliant mechanism for preventing mutiny, but it makes the ship's ascent to power a deeply stressful, paranoid affair. The debate is loud, coarse, and laced with veiled threats. Two factions emerge. One wishes to attack immediately before the wind changes, while another, more cautious group, fears the merchantman might be a heavily armed Q ship designed to lure pirates into a trap. As you stand in the crowd, you realize that a wrong decision here means a slow death in a Spanish prison or an immediate grave at sea. You are forced to cast your vote, aligning yourself with a faction and instantly inheriting the political rivalries that divide the crew. The vote passes to pursue. Instantly, the atmosphere shifts from a chaotic political debate to a highly disciplined military operation. The captain takes total command, his authority absolute under the ship's articles for the duration of the chase. The drums begin to beat a slow, monotonous rhythm, signaling the men to clear the decks for action. Hammocks are down. Sand is scattered across the wooden planks to absorb the blood that will inevitably flow, and the gun crews begin the back-breaking labor of running out the heavy iron cannon. You are assigned to a 4-pounder gun crew, dragging a 2-ton piece of ordnance back by its thick ropes, clearing the bore with a wet sponge, and ramming home a canvas bag of black powder. The smell of sulfur and stale sweat fills the air as the ship surges forward, closing the distance between itself and its prey. Your 24 hours are halfway through, and the horizon is burning with the promise of iron and fire. You are standing at the waist of the ship at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, wiping a mixture of salt spray and black powder soot from your forehead. The chase has dragged on for hours. The Portuguese merchantman is still a mile ahead, her white sails straining against the midday heat, while the Fancy pursues like a patient, predatory shadow. The initial adrenaline of the morning has burned away, replaced by a heavy, psychological fatigue that settles over the entire crew. This is the zenith of the voyage, the moment where the ship is farthest from any safe harbor, suspended in a blue desert where the law of the land has no meaning. You are beginning to feel the profound weight of isolation that defines the high-end pirate career, a loneliness so absolute that it transforms the vast ocean from an open highway into an inescapable, watery cage. Look around at the men during this agonizing lull. They are sitting in small, silent clusters along the gunwales, sharpening their cutlasses on oil stones with a slow, hypnotic scritch-scratch that sounds like a cricket in a graveyard. No one speaks. The democratic euphoria of the morning vote has hardened into a cold, transactional calculation. In this state of isolation, every man becomes a solitary island of ambition and fear. They are calculating the risks. If the merchantman opens her gun ports to reveal 20 heavy 12-pounders instead of a peaceful cargo of sugar and spice, many of the men sitting around you will be torn to pieces by flying wooden splinters within the hour. There is no hospital ship following behind, no surgeon with clean instruments, and no pension for the maimed. The pinnacle of pirate freedom is, in reality, a peak of absolute vulnerability. The isolation is not just geographical, it is profoundly psychological. You are sailing under a flag that marks you as hostis humani generis, the enemy of all mankind. Every port controlled by a European power is a trap, Every civilian vessel you meet is a potential executioner or a victim that will hate you forever. If you fall sick now, if your mind cracks under the pressure, or if you simply wish to say, "I quit," there is no mechanism for retreat. The sea offers no exit ramp. This realization breeds a unique, dark philosophy among the crew, a mindset that the legendary pirate captain, Bartholomew Roberts, summarized as a short life and a merry one. But as you watch the oily, yellow water of the mid-Atlantic slap against the hull, you realize there is very little mirth in this isolation. There is only the grim, unyielding determination to see the gamble through to its violent conclusion. The sun reaches its highest point, baking the deck, until the pitch between the pine planks bubbles and sticks to your bare feet like hot glue. The captain stands on the quarterdeck, holding his brass spyglass to his eye, his face unreadable. He carries a double burden of isolation. He was elected because of his skill and his daring. But he knows that if this chase fails, or if the next 3 prizes yield nothing but timber and dried cod instead of gold, his crew's loyalty will evaporate like the morning mist. A pirate captain is only as secure as his last successful raid. If the men begin to suspect he has lost his luck, or that he is showing signs of hesitation, a quiet midnight meeting by the crew will replace him or leave him, marooned on a desolate sandbar with nothing but a bottle of water and a single pistol. To be a pirate king is to sit upon a throne of gunpowder while your subjects hold the matches. You are worshipped as long as you feed them gold, and devoured the moment the plates run empty. This constant, low-level paranoia is the true price of power on the high seas. You can see it in the way the quartermaster watches the captain and the way the gunner watches the quartermaster. It is a chain of mutual suspicion held together only by the shared desire for wealth. And yet, even if you succeed, even if the Portuguese ship surrenders without firing a shot, and her hold is found to be bursting with silver chests, the isolation does not end. It deepens. Gold cannot be eaten. It cannot cure the dry scurvy or stop a gangrenous leg from rotting. In the middle of the ocean, a chest of diamonds is nothing more than extra ballast, a heavy reminder of a world you can no longer return to, and a life you have bartered away for shiny metal. As the afternoon begins to wane, the Portuguese merchantman suddenly changes tack, her sails fluttering as she attempts to run downwind, using her heavier weight to blast through the choppy seas. The captain of the Fancy roars an order, and the ship leaps forward in response, the timber framing screaming under the sudden strain. The distance between the two worlds is shrinking rapidly now. You can see the tiny, terrified faces of the merchant sailors peering over their stern rail. The illusion of your 24 hours of freedom is about to be tested in the cold, unyielding fires of combat, where the isolation of the sea means that whatever happens next, no one in the civilized world will ever hear your screams. You are sitting on the darkened deck at 11 o'clock at night, watching the black Atlantic swallow the last bruised embers of twilight. The grand chase did not end in a glorious clash of steel or a cinematic shower of gold. The Portuguese merchantman slipped into a coastal fog bank as dusk fell, leaving the Fancy to drift aimlessly in an empty, silent void. The heavy iron cannons have been dragged back and secured. The sand that was scattered to drink the crew's blood has been swept into the sea, unsoiled but heavy with the salt of your own sweat. Your first 24 hours on a 17th-century pirate ship are drawing to a close. And with the night comes a heavy, suffocating clarity, the wild adrenaline that carried you through the storms. The rigging and the democratic fury of the midday vote has evaporated, leaving behind only the cold, unyielding reality of what you have truly become. Look up at the stars pinned to the velvet canopy above. They are the same stars that guide the king's warships, the merchant barons, and the honest fishermen home to their families. But for you, they are merely markers on an endless highway to nowhere. You have traded the cruel, predictable tyranny of civilization for an autonomous, lawless freedom that is, in its own way, an entirely different kind of prison. There is no triumph in this dark, floating republic. There is only the grinding, daily negotiation with your own mortality. As you listen to the rhythmic, melancholy sigh of the ship's timbers swaying in the midnight swell, you realize that the real tragedy of the pirate's life is not the terrifying violence of the battle, nor the very real threat of the gallows at Hope Point. The true tragedy is the absolute, permanent isolation of the soul. The ship is quiet now, settling into its midnight routine. Below deck, the collective breathing of 70 exhausted men creates a low, rhythmic hum that sounds like the respiration of a great wooden beast. They sleep with their cutlasses tucked beneath their canvas hammocks, their fingers curled even in their dreams, ready to wake and kill at a moment's notice. You choose to stay on deck, leaning your back against the rough oak of the mainmast, preferring the biting chill of the sea breeze to the suffocating, gangrenous air of the berth below. Your body aches with a profound, bone-deep fatigue. Your hands are raw. Your gums bleed from the salt-hardened food, and your mind is completely spent from the constant, hyper-vigilant dance of navigating the fragile egos of desperate men. We are men who have written our own laws upon the water, knowing full well that the sea has no memory and the land has no mercy. Let the heavy, hypnotic rhythm of the ocean wash over you now. The rolling of the hull is a slow, ancient cradle, rocking you toward a dark and necessary slumber. In this absolute blackness, miles from any shore that would welcome you, the boundaries of time begin to blur. The anxieties of your 24-hour struggle, the hunger, the rot, the fear of the chase, begin to soften, dissolving into the vast, indifferent expanse of the Atlantic. You have survived the first day. You have proven your utility to the collective, looked into the hollow eyes of the world's most feared outcasts, and found a strange, grim peace in the realization that you are entirely on your own. As your eyes grow heavy and the midnight mist settles over your shoulders like a cold shroud, surrender to the slow, steady pull of the tide. The ship will keep sailing through the dark, guided by men who have nothing left to lose, chasing a horizon that never arrives. The world of land, of laws, and of safety is gone, replaced by the eternal, whispering chorus of the sea. Close your eyes, let go of the strain, and allow yourself to sink into the deep, restorative dark of the final slumber.